Assalamualaikum, my name is Arfat and welcome to another video. In today's video, I would like to do something different, and this will be a start hopefully of a series on textual criticism, and I'll be using materials from the text of the New Testament. Metzger, the late Professor Bruce Metzger has the book by the same title, but I'll aim this towards people that doesn't know anything about the New Testament and they want to learn about the New Testament and they want to learn about textual criticism first. Yeah, which is not something that I would recommend you do, but if you want to learn it, for me, I'm very interested. And so I have acquired some literatures to tickle my interest. And so I'd like to share this knowledge with you. And I'm still learning as well, and I'll never stop learning. And so we'll jump straight to chapter 2. Chapter 1 is about the importance of textual criticism, and it is very important because without textual criticism, the Greek New Testament today will not be as close to what the original looked like. No, we will never know the original. Okay, we will never go back to the original unless we found the original, but we have not found the original. Archaeologists have not found the original. Obviously, I'm not involved in the archaeology. I'm just someone that is interested, and I'd like to share this with you. So, how ancient manuscripts were actually written? Now, I'll not go through with you in details, and this book is also very brief, but I'll make it even briefer. Okay, and I'll dedicate a few videos. Um, I'll not do one video, one chapter. I'll probably do 2 or 3 chapters in one video, in one short video, about half an hour or so, less than half an hour. And I'll not edit this video, and so you are learning with me in real time. Okay, and so sometimes I might adjust the camera because it is out of focus or the light changes, so on and so forth. And so please bear with me. um, I do not have the time in the world to edit video, and so I would rather just turn on the camera and then do my thing and then just turn it off. So there are in between, there will be times whereby I'll go and grab literatures here and there, so, and because I'm using wireless or so I can just go anywhere and grab literatures from my bookshelves. And so you might not see me for a while, but yeah, we're just going to do it that way. And so it's more like a classroom environment, whereas we are all learning about textual criticism together. And obviously, I'll do about the introduction to the New Testament and so forth, like that. So before we have the New Testament, before Jesus came down, or before Jesus was born, um, people started writing. People have been writing. Cavemen have been writing, on rocks, on caves, so on and so forth. And so we will go through with you. So we have cave writings, okay, or we call it inscription. Okay, inscriptions, cave writings, and these are mostly done on rocks, trees, okay, the branches of the trees, okay, back of leaves. Hopefully you can see. I do not have the best of handwriting, so please forgive me. Back of leaves, so on and so forth. We on camels, on their basically on their animals. Okay, we have Quran written on camels, Quran written on when the companions were writing, they were writing everywhere. They're writing verses on their burden animals, so on and so forth. And so the ancients as well, the cavemen, they were writing in rocks, on the back of leaves, so on and so forth. And so from the early age, human beings have the tendency to actually write. Okay, because writing is also a form of communication. And when we get to the Gospels, you'll realize that the Gospel authors, they actually wrote down the accounts of Jesus, okay, to communicate. To communicate what? To communicate these stories and these narratives to their communities. But for what purpose? Because they have come to believe, okay, that Jesus have brought them something that is, when I say Jesus alayhi salam, Jesus have brought them something unique. Okay, Jesus have brought them the good news, evangelion. Okay, the good news of what is contained in the good news. Yeah, the good news contains the message of salvation. Okay, and a continuation of the Torah, okay, of the Tanakh, of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and the authors actually quote Jesus. Okay, we do not know. We will assume, because we are doing textual criticism, we are not doing actually. Textual criticism is not a criticism of the text. Okay, textual criticism is actually to uncover what is the earliest plausible readings of the Greek New Testament. It is not to look at the text and criticize or Mark invented the story of Jesus, so on and so forth. No, somehow we will get to that, okay, when we start analyzing, when we compare different manuscripts. But textual criticism is basically to compare, manuscripts and to establish which one is actually the earliest reading. We will get to the genealogy, the different approach, as well as the modern approach, CBGM, so on and so forth. So we're gonna hold our horses. We're gonna start from the very beginning. Okay. And so after inscriptions, we have a thing called. Hopefully you can see. I'm gonna change my color here. We have a thing called the clay tablet or the wax tablet. Okay, wax tablet or even clay tablets. Just put it clay or wax tablets. Okay. Obviously it is made out of clay, made out of mud, made out of all sorts of materials. And so these are the writings that the Babylonian used, the old Babylonian, okay, the Assyrians, okay. For example, the Epic of Gilgamesh, if you know about the ancient Near East, okay, and also the flood narratives of the ancient Near East, so on and so forth. And so we have, oh, I'm sorry, you can't see. So we have Babylonian writings and all written on wax tablet, clay tablet. Okay, I'm going to change ink here. And so after this, we have the papyrus. I'm going to use here. Number 3. If you see here, this is actually a papyrus I'm going to show you. And I've actually made a video about this. Papyrus. Papyrus is the writing materials that are made by the ancient Egyptian. Okay. Circa 2000 BCE, meaning circa means year. BCE means before the Common Era. Okay, before Jesus. Okay. Ironically, Jesus was born on the 4 BCE, according to most historians. Okay, but we will not go into that. I've made videos about that as well. So papyrus is actually the third one that's being used. And this is the most common when it comes to the writings of the New Testament. Okay, a lot of our New Testament earlier on, earlier copies of the New Testament, parchments, okay, our earliest copies of the New Testament that are written on papyrus are parchments, meaning they're not the complete. Parchments can basically be from a small credit card size. For example, if you find papyrus writings on this can also be considered a parchment. I'm sorry, it's not focused. Okay, this is also considered a papyrus parchment. Yeah, it can be as small as this. It can even be with holes here and there. Yeah, and so this is papyrus parchments. It can be torn, and a lot of the earlier papyrus copies of the New Testament, they are, they're not in great shape. The thing that really changed and allow for the preservation of the text of the New Testament is actually the materials called parchment, not papyrus, parchments. Okay, um, parchments are materials. Parchments are basically parchments and vellum are they're the same thing, but they're of different grading. So for those of you who want to go into the technical thing, I'll just put parchments and vellum to be the same. Okay, um, parchments. Let me change ink. Parchments are animal skin that have been dried, and I've watched videos on YouTube about how people make parchments, and they're actually very difficult to make. And I have my hands on parchment. Okay, I have a few pieces of blank parchments, and I've made videos about that. I can't show it to you because it's behind this board. Okay, and so do look out for my videos where I show you parchments. The parchments are basically leather, and they're written. People write them. People write at the back of the animal skin. Depending on how the parchment is actually done, you can even write on both sides. Okay, like Codex Sinaiticus was written on both sides. And so parchments, I'll use here. You can see here parchments. Okay, parchments. They're commonly being used around the 4th century. Okay, probably early 4th century or late 3rd century. By the 4th century, a lot of the rich people are actually writing on parchment. Whenever someone commissioned uh, the New Testament copies to be made for churches, so on and so forth. Okay, like when Emperor Constantine commissioned Eusebius of Caesarea, the bishop of Caesarea in Palestine, to produce copies of the Bible. Um, he was Eusebius probably, we do not know. Okay, Eusebius probably used parchments, and there are theories whereby Codex Sinaiticus. We will get to that. I'll just throw out some words to you, which I'll explain in the following few videos. Basically, Codex Sinaiticus is an early manuscript, okay, early complete copies, the earliest complete copies of the Bible there, of especially the New Testament. He contains the Old Testament as well, but the complete copies of the New Testament currently. And it also contains books that are not found in our modern day Greek New Testament. So parchment is probably used around 4th century CE, and it was first used as an for official usage. I'll just put it here. You get what I mean? Like for rich people to use, whereas papyrus continued to be used by the lower class. Okay, papyrus continued to be used by the lower class. And so these are kind of the 4 materials. Now obviously we have paper. Okay, but we will not concern ourselves with paper, because paper, even though it's invented by the Chinese by the 1st century of the Common Era, but paper was only being used to write the New Testament, you know, from the 10th century onwards, 9th, 10th century onwards. So when it comes to textual criticism, we want to look at manuscripts. Okay, we want to look at manuscripts as early as possible. Okay, if you look at the Novum Testamentum Graeci, okay, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me. We have manuscripts that date all the way to the 5th century. Okay, 5th century manuscripts are still being used. Okay, we will explain why. Okay, why people say that? Oh, why are you using 5th century manuscripts? You know, I thought you want to get to the earliest manuscripts as possible. No, if we have the complete copies of Sinaiticus, then why don't we just use Sinaiticus? Okay, a lot of people say that we should use Sinaiticus because it is the earliest copies, complete copies of the New Testament that we have. But we have parchments that are much earlier than Sinaiticus. And some of these readings actually disagree with Sinaiticus. Okay, and so we shouldn't just use Sinaiticus. And the reason why some of these other later manuscripts are actually being used is because they are copies of much earlier manuscripts that contains a great genealogical tradition. Okay, we, we just ignore me if I'm using like genealogy. What do you mean genealogy of manuscripts, so on and so forth? We will get to that, and it will be a very, very interesting video, inshallah. Now, so I've gone through with you the 4 different materials, actually not 4. We can ignore caveman writings, inscriptions. We can even ignore clay and wax tablets. We will focus primarily on papyrus and parchments. Okay, papyrus we have a lot. A lot of our early copies of the New Testament manuscripts are actually on parchments. Sorry, on papyrus, not parchments. Yes. And we have later, much later, after the 4th century, the 3rd century, we have copies of the New Testament on parchments. Okay, and if you look at and this goes all the way through the medieval ages as well. And if you look at some of these manuscripts, okay, of the New Testament, of the Bible, actually, of the Bible, it contains a lot of decoration. Okay, it contains ornament, for example. And so some of these manuscripts, and I've looked at them online, they're actually very, very, very beautifully painted and decorated. Okay, give me a second to erase here. Now I'm gonna go through with you the handwriting. And it's actually very interesting to learn about textual criticism, because when you read the New Testament, especially when you read the New Testament in English, um, without knowledge of textual criticism, you probably think things differently. Once you have knowledge of textual criticism, then you start reading things from a more critical perspective, and that is the idea here. We want to promote critical reading rather than blind reading. Okay, so we've gone through the manuscripts. Now I actually need to go through with you the writing materials. Okay, we have when scribes use when the materials that scribes use to write on papyrus. So we'll just focus papyrus and parchments. Okay, the writing materials. So when scribes were writing the New Testament on papyrus and parchments, they're not using a ballpoint pen. They're not using Sharpie. Okay, they're using the thing called, and I also have made videos about this, um, reed pens. Okay, reed pens is something like this, and again I've made videos demonstrating to you what reed pens are, and it is actually a very great experience to write on reed pens. The sound that it made, um, is very difficult at first, and much later on they will use a quill pen. Okay, the if you know this quill pen, it has a much sharper tip, okay, than reed pens. Okay, modern reed pens are made of bamboo, but they are made of reed plants, okay, of various types. Quill pen, yeah, we do not actually need to go through. Not so important when it comes to writing, even though it's being used. But from my knowledge, a lot more were using reed pens. Okay? especially for decoration. They're also using reed pens. And obviously you need the ink. Okay, and the ink were actually made of plant-based. They were made of gum, so on and so forth. Okay, and you can actually read you can buy this book and read, or if you have the text of the New Testament by Professor Bruce Metzger, the late Professor Bruce Metzger, he actually described how ancient inks were made, so on and so forth. And so those are the two writing materials, reed pens and quill pen. We will not focus on, actually we don't need to focus on this. This is just me sharing with you the writing materials that they use. Before we end today's video, I want to go through with you the final thing, the different forms of books. Okay, for the lack of better word, different forms of books. What do I mean by different forms of books? Okay, firstly we have the scroll, and we have the scrolls or rolls, and then we have the thing called a codex or codices. Okay, irregardless of papyrus or parchments, okay, they are being used in this form: papyrus, parchments. Okay, how do we know? Now, basically, what are scrolls and what are codices? Now, if you live in Southeast Asia, you have a different thought. Okay, in Southeast Asia, up until the 19th century, even 20th century, people were using scrolls. Okay, but the scrolls were actually rolled up. I can't draw scrolls here. They actually rolled up vertically. Okay, and this was not how the ancient Mediterranean people actually writing their scrolls. Okay, they're writing their scrolls from a horizontal perspective. Okay, meaning they roll their scrolls this way. Okay, they roll their scrolls this way and not that way. Okay, and so we should not get confused here. Okay? And if you know about the Qumran community, supposedly they produce the Dead Sea Scrolls. The scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're this kind of scrolls. They're not these kinds of scrolls. Okay, I'm not saying that these kind of scrolls are not actually found. Okay, but popularly these kinds of scrolls. Okay, so let's make some conjecture here. Okay, the Apostle Paul, when he was writing his letter to Corinthians, to Romans, okay, to the Thessalonians, was he writing on papyrus or was he writing on parchment? And did he write in scrolls, the scrolls format, or did he actually write in codices? Okay, codices meaning book. Okay, whereby you can flip to the next page. Okay, you can write no book this way. Most probably he was probably writing on scrolls. Okay, because codices was only popularized on the 2nd century, and Paul obviously, according to Christian tradition, he was martyred around the year 64 at the persecution of the Emperor Nero. Um, Sorry, the Emperor Nero, or before that, the Emperor Nero reigned 67 of the CE. Yeah, I'm confused. I'm confused here. Please correct me. And so he probably died around the year 60 something, the Apostle Paul, based on Christian tradition. And so now, later on, because when we have the writings of the Apostle Paul on codices, and this is our earliest copies. And how do we know this? That they're not written on scrolls, because materials that are actually written on scrolls, they're not written on both sides. Okay, meaning you have a single sheet of paper, they're not written on both sides. Okay, they're only written on one side. But our manuscripts, early manuscripts of the Apostle Paul, they're written on both sides of the papyrus. So we know that our earliest copies were actually written on codices format. Yeah. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. And if that doesn't make sense, please forgive me. So today we've gone through with you, we've gone through together actually the different uh, materials, okay, the writing materials, different paper. We have gone through the different forms of the written text, okay, whether it is in scrolls or it's in codex or codices. And in the following video, we will actually go through with you. We will go through together, okay, the handwriting. What sort of handwritings are actually being used? Okay, and also I want to get into the different versions of the early New Testament manuscripts. Okay, and we will go through about the different translation. Okay, the earliest text of the New Testament. What was the earliest text of the New Testament? What language were they written in? Okay, if you say Greek, then you're correct. But was it classical Greek, or Koine Greek, marketplace Greek? And so, what are the early translations that we have? For example, when we have the Sahidic translation, the Bukharic translation, okay, Syriac translation, Aramaic translation, they're not the same. Syriac and Aramaic are not the same. They're using different alphabets. Okay. The translation, later on we have the Armenian translation, so on and so forth. And how significant, or are they even significant at all when it comes to textual criticism? And also we will look at the different, well, not in the next video, but in future videos, we will look at the different genealogy of the manuscripts. Okay, even though scholars have moved away from that, okay, but it is also important to know the history. And so I will go through with you the history about the different genealogy of the manuscripts and how scholars actually determine, okay, not with precision, but using methods, okay, rigorous methods, the different manuscript families, okay, and the different textual families. There's a difference actually, okay, between the writings and between the materials being used. Even though they both at times goes together, but actually different. Okay, the textual families is what we are concerning about. Okay, the we'll get to that. Okay, and so hopefully this video makes sense to you. My name is Arfat, and I'll see you on my next one. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.